On behalf of the co-conveners of this IPT 2015, I declare open this International People's Tribunal on Crimes Against the Filipino People 2015.
President B.S. Aquino's economic policies are violating the human rights of the people, implementing his own counterinsurgency program called Oplan Bayanihan that is supportive of imperialist plunder of the country's natural resources, especially those favoring U.S. interests. This is encouraged by the U.S. government as represented by President Barack Obama, whose Asian pivot allows such violations to continue.
Pagpasok ni Willen sa gate ng Alaybayan, biglang may dumating na dalawang kalalakihan na armado na maikling baril at sa pilitan at pwersahan siya na hinablot at pwersahan siyang pinaluhod at tinutukan ng baril sa bandang likuran at doon siya binaril.
He was brutally shot in front of my mother, Purificacion Hemarino. And my mom was 91 years old, physically disabled. She uses a walker. She had hip fracture, and Romy usually picked her up in our store. He was appointed as at the time manager of Panay Fair Trade Center. It's a fair trade organization that helps farmers. It's emotionally draining. Most especially to the kids. The youngest, Katrina, has still nightmares at this time. It's heart-wrenching to hear a 21-year-old hear her calling her dad. And my mom, every time she hears any fireworks or a bang, would tremble.
We were staying at a house when approximately 15 men in civilian clothing with high-powered rifles, bonnets, and ski masks forced me and my two other companions, which were health workers, into a van and took us to what I believe to be a military camp. And there I was handcuffed and blindfolded, and for the 6 days that I was there, I was repeatedly beaten, suffocated, and underwent other forms of torture.
He was one of the 9 people who was killed during a massive military operation by forces belonging to the Armed Forces of the Philippines. They were not killed during a legitimate running gun battle with the AFP. That they were unarmed, they were captured, they were willfully killed, and their bodies were desecrated thereafter. This is the conduct of the Philippine government on the civil war that is going on in our country. It is patterned under the U.S. counterinsurgency strategy, and it is heavily funded by the U.S. government. There is also the Comprehensive Agreement on the Respect of Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law that the National Democratic Front and the government of the Republic of the Philippines had agreed upon to protect the rights of civilians as well as combatants. But all these were violated by the military. Mm-hmm. I urge this tribunal to hold President Benigno Simeon C. Aquino III as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, directly accountable for the war crimes committed against my husband, the other members of the New People's Army, as well as the civilians where they committed atrocities.
And on November 16, 2004, 7 were killed or massacred, and hundreds were wounded. That's the Hacienda Luisita massacre, Your Honor. Then Congressman Benigno Silvio Aquino III delivered also his previous speech, but virtually justifying the massacre. And no single word of condemnation come from President Noynoy Aquino.
As regards the massacre that happened in Hacienda Luisita,
The victims, the families of the victims, filed the case with the Ombudsman. But as far as I know, such case was dismissed on December 10, 2010. It's ironic, Your Honor, because December 10 is a Human Rights Day.
So from 2002, we've documented several cases and reports of U.S. soldiers participating in direct combat operations in Basilan. And then we also documented cases in Sulu, Zamboanga City, and then there are also in 2004 and 2006 reports coming in from Maguindanao and North Cotabato. These include the shooting and maiming of civilians and farmers in Basilan, and people and witnesses attested to seeing Americans in the combat operations. And there's also reports of drones in the community, and some of the farmers even presented to us and to the media the destroyed drones who fell down in the community.
But every time you go to a hospital, there is no medicine. I'm sure each and every one of the Filipinos here, even the overseas Filipinos, we have a mother, a father, a friend, a neighbor, a cousin, whom we know who died in the hospital because there were no medicines. There were no funds for medicine. And yet billions of pesos are diverted to pork barrel. When you go and ask for genuine agrarian reform, government says we have no funds. When you go to have the MRT project funded by government says let's privatize them, we have no funds. When you go and ask for education, health, budget, no, government says we privatize the hospital because we have no funds. But in the end, when the pork barrel issue came to the fore, people realized billions of pesos are there, but government would not spend them on health, would not spend them on education. They would rather spend them on highways that lead to nowhere, or bridges without rivers, because that's how corrupt the system is. We will win this battle against corruption and abuse because we are on the side of the truth. And we will win this battle against corruption and abuse because we are on the side of the people.
Over the past 2 long, painful and enraging days, we have closely and keenly listened, watched, seen, asked, pondered on an uninterrupted process of witnesses, survivors, families and friends, victims all in each and every way, as well as experts whose opinions are uncontested and indisputable because they constitute very credible testimonies, accounts, and reports.
The tribunal cannot also ignore the overwhelming evidence showing that the perpetrators were either police, military, paramilitary, and/or other state agents operating within the chain of command. This is evident from the testimonies of witnesses pointing to them as the perpetrators.
In all of these cases, no attempt was made to conduct a serious investigation to determine and establish the identities of all those involved in the violations. This is the pattern of impunity, which is evident in all the cases presented before this tribunal. It is also clear that Operation Bayanihan was devised as is being implemented with the assistance of the defendant government of the United States. The evidence presented for this charge reflects the imposition against the Filipino people of methodologies and modalities of state terror, which share many key common features, such as generalized violation of democratic rights, imposition of neoliberal policies, systematic practice such as torture, forced disappearances, extrajudicial executions for the targeting of political descendants and the indigenous people, etc., with similar cases elsewhere in the world, including the military and authoritarian regime of Latin America in the context such as Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, Peru, Guatemala, and El Salvador in the 1970s and 1980s. This reflects the U.S. imposition throughout the world during the period of national security doctrine and counterinsurgency within the context of the Cold War.
The Filipino people must be allowed to chart their future as a people and struggle for their liberation from the exploitation and oppression of the defendants. Tribunal finds that the control by the U.S. government of the Philippines allowed it to impose political, economic, and military policies in the country, including its war on terror. This tribunal finds that U.S. intervention is not limited to the imposition of its war of terror to defeat the struggle of the Filipino people to liberate themselves from an oppressive and exploitative system, but also includes actions to continue this war by derailing, through terrorist tagging, any efforts by the Filipino people to achieve peace. The defendant's act of terrorist tagging is not only intended to define their military targets, but also sabotage the peace process between the National Democratic Front and the Philippine government.
The nexus between the culpability of the defendant Aquino and the role and participation of defendant United States government for gross and serious violations of civil, political, social, economic, and cultural rights, and the right of the Filipino people to national self-determination and rebellion is borne by the facts and the evidence fully established during the tribunal.
In view of all of the foregoing, we, the jury, hereby renders judgment finding defendant Benigno Simeon C. Aquino III and defendant Government of the United States of America, represented by President Barack Hussein Obama II, guilty of guilty of gross human rights violations involving the civil and political rights of the Filipino people for committing extrajudicial killings, disappearances, massacres, torture, arbitrary arrest and detentions, as well as other vicious, brutal, and systematic abuses and attacks on the basic democratic rights of the people. Guilty of gross and systematic violations of human rights, particularly economic, social, and cultural rights of the Filipino people, through the imposition of neoliberal, quote, free market globalization to exploit the people, transgression of their economic sovereignty, and plunder of their national patrimony and economy, and attacks on the people's livelihoods and the destruction of the environment, and guilty of gross and systematic violations of the rights of the people to national self-determination and liberation through the imposition of the U.S. war on terror, war of terror, and U.S. military intervention, as well as the perpetration of crimes against humanity and war crimes. Misrepresentations of the people's right to national liberation and self-determination as so-called terrorism, and the baseless, quote, terrorist listing of individuals, organizations, and other entities by the US and other governments. We enjoin the defendants to undertake and the people to pursue proper remedial measures to prevent the commission or continuance of such illegal and criminal acts, to repair the damages done to the Filipino people and their environment, to compensate the victims and their families for their atrocities, and to rehabilitate the communities, especially indigenous communities that have been destroyed by the criminal acts of the defendants. We also encourage the peoples of the world to seek redress, to pursue justice, and to transform this oppressive, exploitative, and repressive global state of affairs exemplified by the experience and plight of the Filipino people. To challenge the international, quote, rule of law, and to construct a global order founded on full respect for the full rights of all peoples everywhere.
Ating pamumuhay. Bayan, bayan, bayan ko. Bayan, bayan ko. Di pa tapos ang laban mo. Revolution, Bonifacio. Sulong mo bagong tibok. Ang tao, ang bayan, ngayon ay lumalaban. Ngayon ay lumalaban. Ang tao, ang bayan, the people united. Will never be defeated. Will never be defeated. The people united. Bayang api. Bayang api. Bayang inugutom. Bayang inugutom. Bayang minasakit. Bayang minasakit. Ng aming bisig. Aming bisig. Durugin ang kaaway. Durugin ang kaaway. Aklasang bayan. Aklasang bayan. Isa lang kasagutan. Isa lang kasagutan. Sa pagpapalaya ng bayan. Sa pagkumulang silangan. Malapit na kalayaan. Imperialismo! Ibansa! Feudalismo! Ibansa! Burokratang kapitalismo! Ibansa! Fasistang Estado!